Nowadays, there's a country in Western Europe, and everybody questions its existence. A lot of people ask, why was this country neutral in World War II and nobody tried to take over? How is it possible that this country is not part of NATO and nobody's trying to take over? You probably know which country I'm talking about. Switzerland. Switzerland is a landlocked country, and it's sandwiched between 4 different countries: Germany, Austria, Italy, and France. Anywhere you hear about Switzerland, you don't hear about wars or political problems. And everybody asks, why are they so different? Because they don't know the history of the country. Switzerland is a very small country. 4 different languages are spoken there, and it has a population of 8.5 million people. So whichever you look at it, it's a very weird country. To get to know what it really is like, we have to go to ancient Europe. In ancient Rome, there was no Switzerland because it was part of the empire. After Rome, Germanic tribes take over. After that, Charlemagne, king of France, takes over. And after all this, eventually the Holy Roman Empire shows up. In the year 1291, in today's Switzerland, there were 3 parts, and they basically wanted to leave the Holy Roman Empire. You have to know that the Holy Roman Empire was made up of different groups in Europe, and it was mainly in power in the Middle Ages, and eventually in 1806 it collapsed because of Napoleon. But let's get back to Switzerland. The 3 parts that got together and created their own confederacy was Unterwalden, Uri, and Suisse. These 3 signed a contract with one another, and for the very first time, Switzerland came to life. When we get to the 15th century, this country now has 3 main cities: Zurich, Lucerne, and Bern. You could say the Holy Roman Empire was not stoked that a territory right here is thriving, and they're trying to separate themselves, and that is why they always were trying to take over. The only part of the Holy Roman Empire that actually declares war was Austria. In the 14th century, the Austrians and the Swiss had many wars with each other, and each time the Austrians were defeated. After being defeated so many times, the Austrians tried to get some help, and they made a deal with Swabia, another part of the Holy Roman Empire. Their plan was to attack together so Switzerland doesn't stand a chance. These 2 couldn't do it either, and because of this, it was a plus for the Swiss, and that's because they were forced to sign a peace treaty, and Swiss land was even bigger now, and they also recognized its independence. After this, the Swiss thought of themselves as powerful, and that is why they tried to expand towards France and Italy, and they basically made their lands a little bit bigger. You have to know that in the Middle Ages, Europe was in a very bad spot. Each city had their own emperor, and they always fought with one another. At that time, Milan, Venice, and the French declared war on Switzerland, and they basically put them back where they left off. And when the Swiss retreated, they let them go. In the 15th century, there was a new religion going around Switzerland, and a lot of them converted to Protestant Christians. After this, it caused a polarizing situation to happen because there was a lot of Catholic in Switzerland as well. And because of these 2 religions, there was a civil war in the country, Catholics versus the Protestants. An interesting part about Switzerland is that since they had problems with each other's religion, they both didn't want to damage Switzerland, and they didn't want this war to cause their country to be collapsed. Just because of this ideology, they eventually got together and made peace with one another. Swiss was next to the Holy Roman Empire for more than 2 centuries, but they still wouldn't recognize it as a real country. When we get to the 18th century, the Holy Romans finally recognized Switzerland as a country, but it didn't last for very long. Because in a very short period of time, Napoleon was gaining power in France. When Napoleon gets into power, he basically takes over Europe, including Switzerland, and he makes the Swiss a French state. It stays under the French Empire for 20 years, and finally they gain independence once again. Let's not forget that when Switzerland gained independence from the Holy Roman Empire, they were basically a neutral country now, and they were not interested to be involved with any war. And that is why when Napoleon attacked, they didn't really fight him off. After they gained independence from the French, religion problems started once again between the Catholics and the Protestants. And their problem was which religion would be able to rule the country. You could say the tensions were so high that it almost made another civil war happen. But since the Catholics were the minority, they agreed that the Protestants can rule the country. In the year 1848, the Protestant state forms its constitution and actually writes it out. When the Swiss were writing the constitution, they basically copied it off the American Constitution. And you could say they're very similar with one another. The only difference is that the American Constitution cannot be changed, but the Swiss one can. It had been more than 70 years since the American Constitution was written, and you could say it was very respected around the world because it was something very new. And that is why the Swiss were very welcoming on this form of government. When we get to 1914, the First World War has begun, and you could say Europe is on fire. You could say one of the worst areas was the border of Germany and France, and Switzerland is right next to them. Even with all that, since Switzerland was always a neutral nation, they both respected that and did not attack or try to conquer the country. The same situation happened in World War II, and Nazi Germany took over every part of Western Europe except Switzerland. Even though in World War II Switzerland was a neutral country, but a lot of people suggest that the Swiss government was a fan of the Nazi regime. But this is a theory and it has not been proven. Switzerland tried to join the European Union a few times, but you could say they were not interested and they wanted to be left out. And they haven't joined to this day. Right now, 64% of Switzerland speak German, 24% French, 8.5% Italian, and 5.5% other. But these different nationalities created a country that has not been taken over for a very long time. The reason Switzerland was created, we can blame the Holy Roman Empire for. In the Middle Ages, Holy Roman Empire was the main power of Europe. And you could say because of how strict religion was, it was ruining everybody's life. The Swiss did not want to be in the same area as these people. And this is the reason the Swiss Confederation was created in 1291. And because of the neutrality, it made this country be respected around Europe. And they were basically left out of different wars, especially 2 world wars. And it's also good to know that one of the most famous banks around the world are in Switzerland. These banks welcome everybody around the world. It's very low risk because the chances of them going bankrupt is very low, and privacy is extremely high because they don't let anybody know your info. But there is a special rule. In the year 2022, the Internal Revenue Service, meaning the IRS, told Switzerland that any American that has an account on file, you have to report how much they have. Switzerland could not say no to that, and that is why they did it. The excuse IRS used is that there could be money laundering, and if you don't report it, there is a high chance they're money laundering. You could say all the IRS wants is to not miss out on tax money.